Hello and welcome once again to more exciting cybers, talking about networking threats, assessments, and defenses. This is oftentimes what people think about when they think cybersecurity. Hopefully, the end of the road here, we're going to be able to talk about the different types of networking attacks that are out there, different types of network security assessment tools. There's lots of network assessment tools that are beyond the scope of this course. However, I recommend you to our fine Cisco curriculum if that's your jam, as the young say. And then how you might use physical security to enforce network security. Because if I have access to your computer, I own your computer. Or network gear. I'm pretty good with most network gear. I probably can figure it out with a Google search or two. So networks are fun things for hackers to attack. If you find a network vulnerability, if you compromise a VPN concentrator or a firewall or some sort of networking gear, generally that opens up all of the other devices on that network, which Mark points out here can be hundreds or thousands of them. Many, many devices. On a high level, the types of attacks we need to be worried about are attacks involving intercepting traffic, attacks on layer 2, remember your OSI models. If you're not familiar with the OSI model, pause, Google it. In fact, let me help you out here. If you're not familiar with the OSI model, we probably should check out Wikipedia. When we say layer 2, what we are talking about is the step up from the physical layer to the data link layer, which is layer 2. You might want to familiarize yourself with the OSI model. It's the way people talk about networks. Attacks on the domain name system. There were some pretty amazing ones in the past that would have compromised the entire internet. See Dan Kaminsky, who passed recently, a security luminary who was missed. Various denial of service attacks, and then just bad code. People running evil code, coding at you. So interception's a broad category. We're trying to use more inclusive language for attacks like man in the middle. Sometimes we're using machine in the middle, MITM, or person in the middle, individual in the middle. But that is when there is some threat actor, some evil between two parties. And you almost always hear this referred to as Eve intercepting the traffic between Bob and Alice. I've mentioned that in the past, I'm sure. Step 1 is to intercept that traffic, and then step 2 would be to pass it on. If it's encrypted, to decrypt it. But here is Eve, although based on that shirt, I don't know, that could be an Edward. But Alice is trying to talk to Bob. The original communication is interrupted by this system in between the two. If it's an unencrypted communication, Eve can just read it and pass it along. If it is encrypted communication, that's when you have to add the extra step of encrypting the communication. Or if you've intercepted the communication from the GiddyUp, the adversary here can establish a secure encrypted connection with Alice, making Alice think that he is Bob, and then establish a secure and encrypted connection with Bob, making Bob think that he is Alice, and you're back to the same place. So that is a man in the middle type attack, very popular. Machine in the middle. Session replay is just what it sounds like. Recording a session, some legitimate transmission. And this would be especially easy if you were talking like Telnet, where the transmission includes the password. And then replaying it later on. So if I've captured your login credentials on Telnet, I can just replay that transmission or just type them in. An even simpler replay attack might be against a number pad where you see somebody type in the password, the number, you record that, and then you play it back to get into a system. So there are lots of ways to get in there. A couple of them might be attacking over the network, so attacking data in transit between two folks, and then attacking endpoints, so by using tools like cross-site scripting, which I've probably done to you in the discussion forum by now, and then malicious software, including Trojans, including JavaScript, including all sorts of bad things you can do. That machine in the middle attack can be migrated into the browser, where you would get a browser extension or malicious code running, some kind of Trojan perhaps, that is in the system, and that now is a machine in the browser, a little computer inside of there that can handle where the communication between the browser and the computer works. The browser fires up, the extension gets loaded, the extension waits for a specific web page or specific data. For example, account numbers, passwords for banks. The other place these things are notorious is to look for like Bitcoin private keys in order to steal those. So when somebody hits the submit button, it can potentially take that data, return it to somebody, and modify it. An interesting tool for doing that, if you take our ethical hacking class, is the BEEF framework, the Browser Exploitation Framework project. And really, once you've got a system that is compromised by this framework, bad news bears. All sorts of bad stuff happens. So Trojan browser extensions are one thing. BEEF, I think, has a number of ways it can get into your system, JavaScript being probably the most popular. Once that's on there, it can sit there for a long time. So if there is a website with a list of, or a extension, excuse me, if there's an extension with a list of websites that it cares about, it may be looking for popular banking websites or for popular Bitcoin communities, that kind of thing. It can sit there for a long time waiting for that connection to happen. So since it is software in the web browser, potentially your bad malware detection software won't find it, can lead to all sorts of shenanigans. Mentioned that OSI model we should be familiar with. The data link layer is kind of like very old technology. You know, some of the protocols used in the data link layer were designed in the 80s, before we were at all concerned about security. So all of those protocols, potentially, if you compromise something at that low a level of the network, so as we mentioned, the OSI model consists of 7 networks. If you compromise the data link layer, you potentially compromise all of the layers above it. And that is going to be a problem. A popular layer to compromise, or a popular protocol to compromise is the address resolution protocol, where when your computer goes to make a connection with another system, it will need to be able to translate the IP address of the system that it uses for layer 3 communication to the MAC address of the system, the media access control address of the system, that it uses for layer 2 communication. So communication on the local area network. If you do a ARP -A on your computer, it will show you the list of the cached ARP table, the address resolution protocol table, that translates the address of, in this case, my router, to the physical address on the local area network. So that's how they talk over the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi packets are addressed to this. So for example, this is an ARP broadcast asking, hey, who has 192.168.7.68, please tell 192.168.7.1. So on this network, this router is asking who has this address. Eventually it will hear back and say, hey, this address is at this MAC address. And so on. So that ARP cache that we were looking at can potentially be tampered with. It can be poisoned. ARP is a protocol that doesn't care about authenticating the response it gets. It takes the first, so when we send out one of those, hey, who has this IP address, please tell, whatever response it hears back first, it will believe. So if I'm a bad guy on your local area network and I see an ARP broadcast for, hey, what's the address of the router? My system responds back before the router responds back. Now I can pretend to be the router and then please see the machine in the middle attack we discussed previously. So if I can trick Alice's computer into thinking my computer is the router, and then I can listen to all of her internet traffic. So those lower layer protocols get us into some trouble because they're not particularly secure and designed in a world where, you know, they thought computers were multi-million-dollar things. Who's going to goof around with these? Which they discovered was lots of people real fast. So in addition to spoofing, right, you also can clone, where you would take the address of an existing device and pretend to be it. Very popular to become the router in that situation. Or a MAC flooding attack, which works on poorly configured network switches. A network switch similarly maintains a list of these address to the MAC address to IP address pairings. If that overfills, the next thing you know, the switch degrades the way it's working and starts sending all traffic to all systems because its brain is broken and it can't figure out how to appropriately sort through all of the traffic. DNS is the process by which we translate. So the address resolution protocol system translates IP addresses to MAC addresses. DNS translates domain names to IP addresses. So the same way that you have queries for IP addresses turning into MAC addresses, you have queries for, in this case, heisa.de. I think that's how you would say that. It's going to look up this username. It's getting translated back into an IP address. That's a query response, actually. So here's the queries that says, hey, I want to know how to get to heisa.de. The query is looking for heisa.de. It gets a response back in this packet number 65, and it says, hey, that address is, and gets the response back. 193.99.144.80. So that's DNS in a nutshell. If you can swap that number out, you can potentially redirect web traffic to it. You can do all kinds of bad things to that address for then on out. If you can tamper with that communication, for all intents and purposes, you are that address for the remainder of that attack. Poisoning is changing that table. You can change that locally, or you can potentially change that on a DNS server. Windows still has, and most Unixes still have, a host file that they use to, maintain a list of all of the computer systems names that they know about. In Linux, that's called etc hosts, and it has a list of this name is associated with this IP address. In Windows, a similar file exists under, let's see if I can remember this. It's like Windows System 32. Windows System 32. Drivers. And then similarly, etc. And then there's a hosts file in there as well. And it's the same idea. You can manually do these. I manually did this for my network, and I think this is horribly out of date right now for my network. But for example, my kid's TV happened to get this IP address when it spun up. The Oculus had this address, and it helps me to keep track of what devices I'm looking at when I'm looking at my network logs to know that list. So that local host table, if A, you didn't know your computer had one, now you do, can be manipulated by malicious software. So if I put google.com goes to my evilwebsite.com in that list, the next thing you know, no bueno. If I can poison the DNS server you're talking to, so if I can somehow compromise that, I can get into the same kind of mischief by moving around where things are at. So that would be how we would attack DNS. We can poison it locally, we can poison it remotely. If you can get to somebody's DNS system, so most networks have, when you buy a domain name, you get something like a DNS panel for can I has freedomain.ml, which indeed I can, because I do. If I can go in and I can modify these entries, I can get up to all sorts of trouble. There was a South American bank that had its DNS management compromised, led to no end of grief for those folks. So then if I can change that, or if I can infect the server, anywhere along this chain, I can get into all sorts of shenanigans. If I can respond back, it's bad. If it doesn't validate responses to prove that they are what they say they are, which is actually a thing we're working on. We're coming up with improved DNS protocols that will do authentication. Do DNS over HTTPS is a modern thing that browsers are doing. Firefox is doing that all the time these days. The way that might work, if we've got a evil DNS server out there, have a client saying, hey, how do I get to evil.net? No, we wouldn't. We would have a good user trying to get to good.net, and it would ask the DNS server, and it would get back instead the address for evil.net. This is an old poisoning attack that you can't actually do these days, but once upon a time you could send over, if you had an evil DNS server, not only your address, evil.net, but you could reply with other addresses. Now, we fixed that mostly, but that would be a thing that once upon a time you could do. Then when the good user tries to connect, they would instead be directed to evil.com, and off they go. Bad things happen. But once upon a time, yeah, the DNS was, again, one of those protocols that was invented in the kinder, gentler internet and subject to people just doing dumb stuff. So the attacker could ask for evil.net. It would go talk to the evil.net DNS server, and the evil DNS server would reply with not only evil.net, but also all of these addresses. And the dumb DNS server would say, oh, thank you. I appreciate you for sending me what are called gratuitous DNS updates, which are updates I did not ask for, but I'm glad you told me that good.net, better.net, and best.net were also the same addresses, evil.net. That's bad. DDoS is DOS is a distributed, or is a denial of service attack. I just really want to say distributed. But anytime I can deny service to a website, I've committed a denial of service attack, right? So that can happen a lot of ways. If you have access to a server room, if you pull the plug out of the back of the server, you've created a denial of service condition. Congratulations. Using many bots to create flooded network connections to cut them off is known as a distributed denial of service attack, where usually large botnets, such as the Mirai botnet was a big one recently, would flood a target with all sorts of traffic, causing that target to stop working. Brian Krebs, probably the most famous victim of a DDoS attack. I think he, for a while, held the record. I think Google got the largest DDoS attack in history. So the largest DDoS attack, February, as of now, February 2020, AWS. That's a lot of traffic. Hijacked the connection with lightweight directory access management protocol. The attacker targeted, still September 2017, according to our friends at Cloudflare, 2.54 terabytes of data. That's a lot of data. So that's DDoS, usually caused by something like malicious coding and scripting attacks against large numbers of applications. If you're using some kind of language to create malicious code, such as PowerShell or Visual Basic or VBA or what have you, Python, Bash scripts, those, if you can trick a user into executing that code, or if you have access to a system for some reason, you can do that. You're off and running. PowerShell, if you're not familiar, is Microsoft's handy dandy system configuration language. So it's got all of these little programs they call commandlets that do a specific thing, list all the users on a system, change the network adapter information, add or remove things from Active Directory. Being able to run stuff on PowerShell is bad. It means that if an attacker can run PowerShell on a system, they're not going to be uploading software. You know, oftentimes these are called LOL tools, or living off the land tools, that will let us infiltrate a system without having to download specific tools in there, just use the stuff that's already on that computer. And Microsoft's done some stuff to turn off the default PowerShell functionality, but it still exists. It's still a thing. It's still no end of trouble for systems administrators. Visual Basic for applications is a derivative of Microsoft's Visual Basic language that's usually used inside of Office applications to create like super powerful macros, allow like Excel spreadsheets to do all kinds of awesome stuff. Still a problem. Microsoft's got a bunch of those protections built in that you probably just ignore, that when you open up a document for the first time, you probably can't edit it on most Windows computers because it's in protected view. So you have to click the button that says, do you really want to edit this document? Designed to keep you from running code in documents, which, do you really want documents that run code? Is that functionality we really needed? People do seem to like it, I guess. And then Python is great because it's all kinds of installed everywhere. Except, well, I mean, not on a lot of like client machines. So indeed, there can be Python vulnerabilities out there. So, I mean, these are true of any programming language you happen to be running. And it is possible to write malicious code in Python and have it run on target computers, although it's got to be very OS specific. So you have to really take care to write malware with Python. Always a good idea to be running the latest version. We probably should be done with version 2. Whatever software at this point and only using 3, and keeping it up to date. Bash, or any really scripting language that runs on Unix and I'm pointing to my Mac over here, and Mac OS systems, which is Unix under the hood, allow you to create a script, which is just a list of the programs that run on the system. On a Windows system, that would be analogous to a bat file that would run a list of Windows commands. There's lots of ways to take advantage of any of those kind of automation tools. So be wary of that kind of stuff. There are lots of great systems out there to go and check out how good your network is. Ideally, systems administrators should be familiar with these tools that are usually used by penetration testers and vulnerability assessment experts and people who pretend to be bad guys on your network, to help you figure out how good your network is, and to not waste the time of your penetration tester finding stuff that you can find with an automated assessment tool. So going through and doing network recon, doing discovery of things, manipulating files, and capturing and replaying packets are all things that a solid network administrator should be familiar with doing. In terms of recon, there's a bunch of tools here. The big ones, Nmap should be in every network administrator's arsenal for sure, that goes through and scans things on their network. Tenable's Nessus and other vulnerability management tools like Greenbones Security Assessor, which is like the freebie version of that, should be in everybody's toolkit who's responsible for maintaining a bunch of systems, as well as the others listed here. If you need to enumerate DNS, if you would like to go through and harvest a bunch of user information from the public, a security expert in an organization should be using these sorts of things to go through and figure out what the bad guys potentially could see. And then these will be the tools, some of them at least, that a penetration tester that you're paying good money to have come in as a third party and investigate your network will be using. So if you can get ahead of them, you can get much more bang for your buck out of the actual pen testing work that will start with this stuff. Hopefully you've got a handle on how Linux works. If not, and you are interested in network and systems and information security, start now, because Linux is where all the things live. But you have a bunch of commands in here that you can use to go through and inventory all kinds of stuff on your network. The head command, if I use that same command on the Etsy password file we were looking at earlier, it shows me the top of the password file. If I use tail, it shows me the bottom. If I use tail-f, var, what have I got in here? Varlog messages. It will sit here and follow the file and show you each time the file updates. What else have we got in here? Cat and grep. Cat will concatenate a file to the desktop. Grep will let you search through a file for a particular thing. Chmod or changemod will let you change the permissions on a file. Logger will add things to syslog. You should get a handle on Linux. It is the operating system of choice for hackers, defenders, developers. And if you get a handle on Linux, you've got a handle on Mac OS under the hood. Mostly vice versa. Brew is different than other things we use. We've already talked about scripting tools. Things that facilitate things such as PowerShell, certainly powerful when you are talking about Windows systems. SSH is useful for secure shells to script remotely. OpenSSL lets you do some stuff via scripting. Bash scripts, bat files on Windows are all scripts. Even Python to an extent is sometimes accused of being a scripting language. In terms of looking at your network, you've seen me pull up Wireshark again and again for analyzing data packets that go across the wire. Those things can be picked up at any point between sender and receiver. So all of the local area network stuff, all of the wide area network, those packets are available for analysis. Network administrators should definitely be good with Wireshark. tcdump does that from the command line. And if you're really serious about security, Wireshark is potentially vulnerable when it's sniffing packets on the wire to somebody injecting an evil packet in there sometime. There are frequently vulnerabilities in Wireshark that will make Wireshark do bad things. So using TCP-dump to pull in packets first and then analyze them with Wireshark is usually the best way to do secure packet analysis. Getting good at this stuff will let you learn, is there malware on my wire doing things? Is there some sort of weird connection to weird addresses that I could be concerned with? You should probably be coupling that with some kind of network intrusion detection and prevention system, or NIDS or PIDS, depending on who you ask, in order to do some of the heavy lifting. Like if I just go through Wireshark to look for all of the unusual traffic, that's probably not tenable. But if I use a tool like a a security onion or other network monitoring tool will help me figure out what it is I need to be paying attention to. A tool like TCP Replay, useful not only for making CTFs where you have to analyze traffic, which is a thing you do in the CyberOps class. It is a good way to observe network behavior in real time. So if you wanted to play something back through your system, to like throw it through a test system, if you had a capture of live packets, that is not bad. That is Wireshark that we have seen a bunch in this class. I'm a big fan of an open source tool called Security Onion that I recommend folks use for monitoring systems and just to train you on how system monitoring works. I feel like it's really quite useful, even though so what it's doing, it is monitoring traffic all the time. And when it detects an anomaly that my Suricata alert sees here, it fires off one of these alerts. And I leave the ones for like corporate environments. You may be concerned in a corporate environment that somebody is using the Steam client in order to connect to the internet. I don't really care. That's probably my kids using Steam, or that Dropbox is being used. I was originally concerned about this Tor DNS query, but I recently learned that for whatever reason, Samsung phones want to, they try to reach out to Google.Tor or Google.Onion, the Tor website for Google, just to verify that you can't get to Tor sites. So it alerts you to other things like, should somebody really be connecting to the .cloud part of the internet from your site? And my kids use the .cloud, so yeah, they should. So network analysis, super fun topic to dive deep onto. In terms of physical security control, like I said earlier, if I can unplug your server, I can create a denial of service condition. So if you want to be thinking about how the exterior of the building is set up, or whatever the organization's physical infrastructure looks like, how the internal security works, those are usually locks on inside doors, and then what's going on with the hardware itself. The term industrial camouflage, not thrown around a ton, but ideally making your building not look like much of nothing is usually a good idea when you can do it. Unfortunately, for most businesses, they need to interact with the public, so they will be, available to look up on Google. The address will be there. The hard as you might try to find it, hide it, the maps.google.com will have a copy of you. Barriers are a not bad defense, such as a fence, some kind of passive barrier to prevent things. Anything designed to keep things out. You may hear the term bollard. If you've ever walked down beautiful Juan Oliveras Plaza, the building between what we used to call the main building, or the plaza, I should say, between what we used to call the main building and the parking ramp, with the big tunnel that goes over top, there are bollards that raise up and lower down into the ground to keep people from driving through there. You might have humans who stand outside and verify that somebody's coming through. Sometimes a couple. Those guards might also monitor cameras. You may have drones flying in the air or using closed circuit television to do that. You might also have all sorts of sensors keeping an eye on the buildings. Pretty much anything you ever saw in a Mission Impossible video is what we're talking about with perimeter defenses. And if you've not seen the pyramid, I think I'll throw the link in just in case you haven't. I think I might have played that in this class. But our friends at Switch have a data center in West Michigan that is basically the epitome of all of these things. So they've got all kinds of physical security. Obviously, they're kind of, at least this is the pyramid building, is pretty obvious as to what it is. But they have dudes in almost exclusively dudes in tactical vests with tattoos and firearms. This whole thing is fenced in. It's covered with security cameras. It is pretty intense, physical and external security. They're not messing around there. Internally, again, Switch is good at all this stuff. They've got locks. They've got secure areas that are protected by cars. The cables are securely provisioned, so they've got cables that you couldn't get access to, so you couldn't tap those cables. They're using fancy locks, sometimes electronic, sometimes physical. You might consider smart locks that use a Bluetooth for your facilities, or fingerprint pads that scan a user's fingerprint in order to let them in. You may have physical DMZs. We talk about cybersecurity has network demilitarized zones where we would put potentially easy to take over servers. You might build man traps in. We've got a picture of those. And to make sure that on-premises network gear, on-premises servers, on-premises hard disk storage is all secured. So behind a lock and key, maybe behind one of those fingerprint readers we were talking about, watched by closed circuit television. You also need to take into account things like the temperature of things. This is a man trap. Usually there is either a camera up here looking into this room, or a person behind like a scanner that's, you walk in the front door, somebody says, oh, hi, I'm here to meet so-and-so after this door closes. If that's BS, you call the cops, and the cops come take the person out of the man trap, or they buzz them through and open the inside door, and off they go. In terms of PDS or protected PDS, PCD, protected cable distribution, protected cable distribution, you've got hardened carriers, which is like conduit that is super tough and electrically shielded, and then alarmed carriers that if they're tampered with, so if somebody's banging on it or cutting it with a hacksaw, it will set off alerts. Fire suppression is a thing unto itself, but usually you don't want your electrical equipment getting soaked down with water or whatever stuff comes out of your, A, B, or C fire extinguisher. So data centers you usually want to take extra care with. This is another reason why most organizations shouldn't be running their own data centers. But you may have some dry chemical, not like sand, but not sand, that would land on your equipment were something to go on, or the old halon systems would douse the area in not oxygen, basically, so that the fire, if you recall, the triangle needs fuel, needs a spark, and needs oxygen in order to burn. So it deprives it of the oxygen by replacing it with another gas. That's great for computer equipment. Usually it's bad for any humans who happen to be in there when that happens. They're going to struggle to breathe, which is a thing humans need to do to maintain functionality. So that can be tricky. In terms of like just securing your gear, if you don't have that physical security going on, if you don't have fences outside and locks and man traps and scans for fingerprints and eyes when you get in there, your next defense is just physically locking stuff down. So for most devices, you can get a cable lock that clips into in this case, this cable lock clips into the cable lock port of the device. If you take a good close look at your laptop, you may discover that you've got one of those in there that you've not looked at before. Oftentimes, like at the college, we have storage carts that are basically vaults for laptops that we loan out or that are used in classrooms that also power up the batteries while they're sitting in there. And then EMI is not a huge deal, but they do emit some type of electromagnetic energy. In theory, there are all kinds of like research papers about how You can pick up those fields and read them. You would have like the plots of old spy shows where the bad guys would be sitting outside in a van snooping the EMI of devices. There were allegedly devices that would let you like monitor the output of a CRT screen, like an old computer screen, using devices to pick up the EMI. I don't think that's as easy to do with an LCD. But you'll still hear people talking about the fact that you need to put a Faraday cage around all the stuff that you're really concerned about to prevent spying. It's a little tinfoil hat, but again, I guess you need to know your adversary, and it's not unheard of that you could have somebody spying on you like that. So here's network security in a nutshell. So we got attacks to intercept communication, such as replay attacks or machine in the middle. There are injection attacks to poison normal network operations. So poisoning DNS, where you would either trick the server or trick the host file of a system into thinking that one server, the evil server, is the good server. You can poison ARP to make it think that the evil router is the actual router. There's plenty of different malicious code attacks out there. There are lots of tools to look at to figure out how strong your network is. Should be on the list of every network administrator, systems administrator to understand those at least a high level. Reading packets is a skill, again, that folks should be aspiring to in order to be successful network defenders and system network attackers. Remember physical security. If somebody can just walk into your server room, you don't have any network security. And barriers are great, but humans are better. Barriers backed up with humans, best of all. You want physical security in there. And DMZs, not just for networks anymore.